RoundTable. Good morning and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Virginia Legislative Roundtable. I'm Deb Wake, the president of the League of Women Voters of Virginia. We are happy to have you with us this morning, and we will go ahead and kick it off with Delegate Marcus Simon. I see is with us. Welcome, Delegate Simon.
Good morning, Deb. Nice to see you all this morning. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm the first one up. So I'm going to talk about some of the successes we've had this year with campaign finance and some of the defeats as well. So we have a couple of let's start, I guess, with the positive things that happened this year. As many of you know, over the summer, I chaired a joint committee of the House and Senate on campaign finance. We had a number of recommendations for improving transparency and banning the personal use of campaign funds. The good news is that a version of my bill that I've done for years and years to have Virginia become one of the states that there was two of us left that do not prohibit the personal use of campaign funds. John Bell's version of that passed the Senate yesterday. And so, although I was a little disappointed to see my version tabled in the House, I think John is banking on some of the changes they made in the Senate making it a more viable vehicle. And hopefully, frankly, the shaming that we've done of the House Republicans for flip-flopping on this issue will convince them to entertain Senator Bell's version of personal use after crossover. So hopefully that one gets a more fair hearing and we can continue with that. Very excited to see Delegate Bulova do a couple of things. One of the recommendations of the Joint Committee studying campaign finance, our first recommendation was to continue the committee for another year. Given the COVID pandemic and a lot of the things that were going on last summer, it was in redistricting, taxing our P&E staff at the General Assembly. We didn't get off to as quick a start as we wanted to on that. So we're going to continue the study for another year to start to take a deeper dive in some of the more thorny issues like limits on campaign contribution amount and some restrictions on who can contribute. But some of the things that we did accomplish and recommend are now moving through. One of them, picked up by Republican Delegate Tim Anderson, would create a more public version of VPAP. That's sort of a shorthand way of describing the bill. But it's going to require the State Board of Elections to have a better, more user-friendly interface for people to go ahead and explore the campaign finance filings. Right now, they're very difficult to navigate. VPAP does a good job of pulling that raw data and presenting it in a format that's more searchable. They do graphics, they do a great job, but they're limited what they can do, and they choose which of these reports to pull out and highlight. And so rather than having a nonprofit organization with their own board of directors do that, we think that ought to be a state function to make all that data on every campaign at every level, local, state, and the locality, constitutional officers, all of it will be available and in a format that's really easily searched and reports can be generated from it and so forth. So I'm glad to see that one moving forward. David Bulova had a bill go forward that is actually kind of a big deal, which is will provide record keeping and retention standards for campaign treasurers, and also subject a certain percentage of campaign finance reports to an audit. And I think that's actually pretty huge. Right now, I think arguably, if you're going to have a campaign, a ban on personal use of campaign funds, you've also got to have this audit piece in place. And some minimum standards for what gets kept. If any of you guys have ever poured over some people's campaign finance reports, you see a lot of sort of very vague entries. particularly on the campaign expense side, right? So if somebody ordered a bunch of stuff from Amazon, maybe all you see is, Amazon, $800 supplies, right? You don't know what that stuff is and what it's for, how it was used, whether or not, or how it relates to the campaign activities and things like that. You'll see some people, frankly, they pay for things with their credit card, and then the only entry they put on their campaign report is the check to Visa, right, or American Express. So that's not going to tell us what we need to know. So I think having this bill that's going to have the State Board of Elections promulgate some record retention requirements. It'll also be good for campaigns. I know some of my colleagues, they all voted for it because you have to, groaned about it a little bit, but I think the giving some definition and some specifics to what records you have to keep for how long, and creating some standards for campaigns and campaign treasurers is going to be a very good thing in the long run. So I am having I'm on my phone this morning, so I see a lot of activity in the chat. I don't know, Deb, if you or somebody wants to if there are questions that I should be answering in the chat, happy to respond.
Great.
If there's specific
Simon, I'll read them to you. No problem.
please just-
You there? Okay. One question is, when will we know which House committee will consider the Senate bills and vice versa?
So I think I already saw that this morning as I was getting ready that the Bulova and Anderson bills have been referred to the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee. These will both, I mean, it's pretty clear that these will both go to Privileges and Elections, that they're right in that wheelhouse. And so both houses have a Privileges and Elections Committee. In the Senate, it's chaired by Adam Eben now. That's a recent change. And in the House, it's Margaret Ransone. But so we'll see what happens. What subcommittee they go to might be more interesting. If we can maybe, because we informally know that certain subcommittees are what we call kill committees. Other subcommittees are more working subcommittees. So it'll be interesting to see which subcommittee personal use in particular goes to, or if it goes straight to full committee. So that we'll be watching that. We should know those things by next week. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Are you muted?
That's because I muted myself.
Which is good Zoom etiquette.
Jeez, will the same people be on the extended joint committee?
I think probably not. I'd be very surprised if Speaker Gilbert left me on as chair of the joint committee. So I think that once the session ends, that the House will probably appoint new members. The Senate members will probably stay the same, but I suspect the Speaker will exercise his prerogative to put different members on the committee. So we'll have to see how that goes and who he puts and whether these folks are committed to it. But there are on both sides of the aisle. I would note that freshman delegate Mike Cherry introduced a version of my personal use bill on the House side. Again, Tim Anderson put in the bill, which was a recommendation to have this more robust public-facing website. So there are reform advocates on both sides of the aisle. So I think even if we get more Republicans on the committee than we had from the House side, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't go anywhere.
Great. There's a question about, she said it's not campaign finance related, but can you talk about HR 24?
So HR 24 will be up today for debate. And that's a resolution to change the rules of the House to allow for the discharge of a resolution. It's interesting. We most legislatures don't distinguish between bills and joint resolutions when it comes to the parliamentary procedure of a discharge. Just to sort of what that means is, in most places, a majority of the members of the House, whatever other a House or a Senate, can vote to discharge a committee from its work on a bill if there's, again, a sufficient number of votes in the body itself to pass the legislation. It's sort of a check on the power of the leadership to bottle up legislation. In the Virginia Constitution, it's protected. It's actually, it says a majority of the members present and voting can discharge any bill from any committee. But it uses the word bill. the House has taken the position that a bill and a resolution are different things, and a bill means a bill and a resolution is a resolution. And it would take 2/3 to discharge a resolution. So what my rules change would do would be to treat bills and resolutions the same way, because we know that there are Republicans that have voted for both of these constitutional amendments in the past, one of whom even introduced a second resolution, a second version of the resolution this year. So if we can get them to, if they're serious about wanting these resolutions to move forward, they need to first change the rules. And so that'll be the test vote that'll happen on the floor in the House this afternoon.
We have one more question. Do you have any thoughts on independent expenditures, i.e. PACs that attack candidates but have no connection to the opponent?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, if we had any legislation move forward yet on this, but I think they need to be subject to the same reporting requirements as campaigns. And I would support efforts. And I think we're trying to figure out the best way to do it, but to have even more layers of reporting so that you can figure out who the actual people giving money to these independent expenditure committees are. But I think, yeah, there's a bit of a loophole in Virginia. I don't say a loophole. They report things, but the level of detail with which they report it allows for people to use to create this sort of pocket of dark money. I would call it a shadow, maybe, instead of a loophole, right? Where there's more darkness than there ought to be. And so I know that the committee has been working on how we can shine some light into that shadowy corner of the campaign finance world in Virginia. And I think that work needs to continue.
Thank you. Deb, I think you have a question in the room.
We do. Nancy, what's your question?
The question about the Joe Vogel bill that sets up an independent board of elections through the governor, appointing the board, and then it passed the Senate. And I was wondering what Delegate Simon thought about his views on it and whether it's going to pass the House.
Delegate Simon, I don't know if you heard that, but the question about Senator Vogel's bill that would create the Board of Elections and how,
Yeah.
what you think of it.
Yeah, so I think there are two competing bills out right now that would reshape the composition of the State Board of Elections. I think Senator Vogel's bill has like a 4-4 board with a super judge that would break ties. Having served on a 4-4 or 8-8 board, I am a little wary of that approach. And so I think that in the House, Delegate Ransone has passed a bill that that's large. I guess I think it makes it a little bit larger. I think we go from 5 to 7, but it's 4-3, and it does remain partisan divide, but also has some checks on their power, so that one party can't just run over the other. So I voted against both. I voted against hers. I certainly prefer, frankly, the House approach to the Senate approach, though, on this, if we're going to reform the Board of Elections. So not a big fan of built to fail 4-4s. I know that in theory, they're meant to foster compromise. My experience lately, especially, is that they actually foster gridlock. And so I'm not a big fan of the Vogel bill, a little less concerned with the Ransone bill, and we'll wait and see what comes through.
Thank you so much. Delegate, thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for working for campaign finance reform, and good luck.
Thank you guys for having me. Have a great morning.
Thank you, you too. Next with us here in the room is Senator Boysko, and she is here to represent Senate District 33.
You want to come up to the podium?
I'm going to switch the view here for you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Good to see you today. I'm Jennifer Boysko. I represent the 33rd Senate District, that is parts of Loudoun County and parts of Fairfax County. I live in the town of Herndon, and when the new districts come into play, the district that I would be living in and hopefully would represent would be changed pretty drastically. It would lose all of the Loudoun County portion and would be comprised of Herndon, most of Drainsville, which is Great Falls and McLean, and Reston. So with that, I'm happy to be here. I understand we're talking about campaign finance bills today. I have been a big proponent of campaign finance reform over the past many years. And yesterday we voted out John Bell's SB 463, which I was very happy to support. One of the key pieces that I felt was really important was the provision that allows a person who might need childcare to use campaign funds for that. And, you know, we've seen this in other parts of the country and indeed parts of the world where women who otherwise, primarily women or parents who are caregivers, not having the opportunity because it's prohibitive. If you can't take care of your children, you know, you have some limited opportunities. So I was very happy to support that bill. I'm hopeful that it'll go through the House successfully as well. Just wanting to hear what else you all want to talk about today. I got to listen in a little bit on what Delegate Simon was talking about, but I'm certainly happy to entertain questions or.
About broadband.
Sure. So I'm the chair of the Broadband Advisory Council. And when I became a member in 2016, we had $1 million to spend for the entire Commonwealth. Last year, we passed legislation, not only that the Commonwealth would invest another $100 million, but we got federal funds for $700 more million. We are very close to closing the digital divide. In 2016, we had about 600,000 households without access to broadband. We are now at about 23,000. The second piece that we are going to be looking at is on affordability. And Senator Chap Peterson carried a bill that I am the chief co-patron for that will help harness federal dollars for specifically affordability. We will be one of the first states in the nation. We've been working closely with U.S. Senator Mark Warner's office to make sure that we are aligning the language of that bill appropriately so that we will have a system in place to take that. One of the reasons that we've done such a great job is because we have the VADI grants, Virginia Internet Technology Grants. And we have developed a program working with private entities like your cable communications or telecommunications companies, as well as the localities, together harnessing money and then getting a grant from the state to get infrastructure put in place. We also have empowered our local utilities companies to participate as they are going out to strengthen the grid. They are now able to participate in this grant program so that they're laying fiber down at the same time that they're working on electricity. And it's become a very thoughtful and cost-effective way of getting the infrastructure in the ground. It's really been a great opportunity. We have members from all over the state who serve on the Broadband Advisory Council. Last month when we had our meeting, we had Senator Warner actually came and joined us, as well as the new Secretary of Commerce and Trade here in Virginia. And I know that the new governor, Youngkin, is very interested in making sure that we continue that. So that's one place where we can work collaboratively across party lines and really get some important stuff done. I also saw a question about salary history, and I can't be more excited. I've been working on this since I was, my second year in office, and it's now my 7th year. I have been working for equal pay for equal work for years and years. We have 19 other states who have taken legislative action to close the wage gap. States like Alabama, where I'm from, are ahead of us, which, I said on the floor, like, we're going to be joining the liberal bastion of Alabama, because finally I pared my bill down so that it would be that you do not ask a salary history when you're interviewing someone. I think there are actually 3 things that make the biggest difference. It's asking a salary history. Secondly, it is letting everybody know what other job opportunities are allowed or are in a company. And then thirdly, allowing employees to talk about what their salaries are amongst themselves. Unfortunately, after carrying that for 5 years, people felt like that was
Virginia.
just too much to ask for. So I pared it down. So now that's a salary history bill. It will now go to the House. We got really strong support in the Senate. We will go to the House. Hopefully, they will see that this is a reasonable step, and we will start, paring down the wage divide in Virginia. We know that it's still 80 cents on the dollar for whites, 60 cents on the dollar for Black women, and even lower than that for Latinas. So it's time that we step up. We are behind Abu Dhabi, for Christ's sake. I was interviewed on Abu Dhabi TV about a year ago, and they were like, "Yeah, we're on track to close the wage divide before you all are." And I said, "Well, we're working on that." Another issue that I wanted to talk on, because I work a lot around women's economic justice, or things that typically women are part of, is paid family and medical leave. And this year, Senator Favola was able to get a bill through that would allow a private provider to provide an insurance product. I want to make it really clear, while I absolutely support that, that is not going to solve the entire problem, because most people in Virginia, over half of Virginians, don't have access to a paid family leave policy at all. One, because they're too expensive. Two, because their companies don't offer them. And so I still stand for a universal insurance program that would be something similar to unemployment insurance. We did not carry the bill forward this year because the Employment Commission in Virginia has had some challenges, as you know, the VEC has had some challenges, and we're giving them a little bit more time. I will continue to advocate for that. Again, we are the only industrialized country in the entire world that doesn't have a paid family leave policy. And I think it's time that we join the rest of the world and supported our families, so that when a disaster strikes, you don't have to choose between having your job or caring for your loved one. And an insurance policy would provide up to 80% of your salary in those times for 12 weeks. They would pay, if it were a universal program, you'd pay about the cost of a cup of Starbucks every 2 weeks. That seems to be something that's pretty reasonable to me, and other states have been successful in getting that done. So those are some things. The last thing that I wanted to tell you about is animal welfare. And I have been working for 2 years on a bill that protects research animals from the companies that breed them who do not take care of them. And we have a place in Virginia that has, 2 years ago, they had really heinous and horrible violations. The USDA went in this past year and found 2 more sets of massive violations, including hundreds of dead puppies left in the cages with their litter mates, mangled animals, feces of 6 inches or more in the cages. And so together with Senator Bill Stanley, my best animal welfare advocate in the General Assembly, and I, and Dave Marston, who is the chair of the Companion Animals, we've passed a set of 8 what I think are landmark bills that will put some teeth into making sure that this comes to a halt. We've given them a little bit of grace, giving them another year to really clean things up, because they've got 5,000 dogs to deal with, and only 17 employees have been taking care of those 5,000 dogs. It's a real problem. But we passed them all out yesterday and the day before, and I'm celebrating. I've done a lot around animal welfare, and this was a really big deal. So I appreciate you all for giving me an opportunity to speak, and thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Senator Boysko. Also with us this morning is Delegate Carr, representing the 69th District. Welcome, Delegate Carr.
Good morning. Delighted to be with you this morning. See that the topic is the campaign reform. I mean, here's our hero just coming in the door, David Bulova, and supportive of his measures that you have listed down. And the only thing I have not been involved personally in this, but very supportive of it. But I do know, and I'm going to take away David's line, but what I think his wife came out one day while you were sitting on the porch, and he evidently said, you know, raising money for campaigns costs more than our house mortgage. So this is just not the way it should be. We shouldn't be spending all this money for campaigns when there's so many other needs, crucial needs in our areas, in our state, in our Commonwealth. I'm very happy to be here this morning. I mentioned a few things that we've gone over and love to hear whatever you're interested in. I guess one of the big things on topic right now is I've heard from a lot of community neighborhoods in my area that are really, I have to use the word terrorized by the excessive exhaust noise. And so that we're trying to do something about this. We're aware that, you know, there's the issue of the pre-stop, which we don't want to make it so that more Black and brown folks are stopped, made traffic stops. On the other hand, those are not the folks that are, we understand, that are causing the loud noises in our areas. I've had diverse neighborhoods from my district, both north and south of the river in Richmond, all kinds of folks. Please help the law enforcement folks have some kind of mechanism so we can stop the noise. It's terrorizing our elder citizens. It's waking us up in the middle of the night. It's ruining the quality of life. So that's one thing that we're trying to do. As I said, we've got you know, a needle to thread here, and we need to be aware of all the issues, but we hope to move forward with that. One other thing that you may be interested in, our nursing homes do not have any standards. We're going to, I think, of just one of a few states that don't have any standards as far as ratio of staff to residents. And this is a real issue. Again, we've heard from people who just don't have their, you know, haven't gotten their medications just because they haven't had enough staff to take care of all of this. So both Delegate Watts and myself have put in bills with this, and they're kind of parallel, but there's some differences, but we were heard by the committee, and while they're not able to do anything this year, they have promised that we're going to have a study for have meetings for three meetings throughout the year, and hopefully we'll have something ready to go in the fall so that we can finally get to this, because I know it's been an issue for 10, 15 years. That's one issue that we're happy that we're moving forward with. There are two things that, and this is being in the minority, sometimes when we have bills, they are moved over and the majority party carries them. But as somebody told me once, you know, you can get a lot done if you don't care who gets the credit. So there are two bills that I'm very happy at chief co-patriot on. One is, it's called vulnerable road users, but in our district, we had, and I understand that this has happened in a number of areas, a young student was killed by a driver who couldn't see what was going on and so forth, and accident killed a 16-year-old student. And this is we have something that was tweaked in the code so that now, you know, it's not the same if you hit a telephone pole versus you hit a student or somebody on the side of the road, or bicyclist or something. So this is making the drivers accountable if a person is killed rather than hitting a telephone pole. And one other thing, in a lot of our areas, we've been having, you probably heard about the catalytic converters being stolen. And those, again, it's very easy for them to be stolen. It takes 2-3 minutes to commit the crime. Whoever steals can turn them in, get $800 and $900 to repair those automobiles or the vehicles that have been removed. Their catalytic converters have been removed. The cost can be $3,000 to $5,000. So we're trying to, again, this is another thing that we're trying to do. One exciting thing that didn't go anything, but didn't go specifically go anywhere this year, but a lot of people are very interested in it, and I'm sure we'll go somewhere in the future with it. It's called No Child Left Inside. And one of our principals has brought this program from Maryland, but the idea is to have the children outside doing all kind of environmental literacy projects, weather maps, butterfly gardens, testing water, that kind of thing. And the idea being that it's kind of documents show that the more students spend time outside, the better their both behavior and academic achievement is. So this is, and this is particularly true like in our urban communities. So we're moving forward with that, but had a lot of support from communities in our environmental advocates with that. Gets the students involved in hands-on. And one of the things is that I'm fortunate in being on the JLARC Commission. As you know, they come out, they're the watchdog for how our taxpayer money is spent and how our state agencies are run. And there, I think you heard Senator Boysko mention about the Virginia Employment Commission. They came out with a study in November with a number of suggestions, as we've heard the difficulties and challenges that the Virginia Employment Commission has had. So I had legislation that included those recommendations. So happy that we're moving forward with that. One last thing that you may be interested in, a number of students, we've heard from Virginia 21 young students who want, who are concerned about when students haven't finished paying their bills or haven't paid their bills, then the colleges and universities withhold their transcripts because that's the leverage that they have for being able to get their bills paid. And so there's been, you know, that affects different students different ways, different colleges and universities different ways, because some that be a big impact. For some, they can manage to do it. Are these outer state students or these in-state students? But with the legislation, with that was turned into a study. So we're gonna have something in the budget bill. We'll be able to study that and we'll be able to come with specifics. It's not an issue that can be taken care of with a big SWAT. It's, we have to have, it's not one thing, one size fits all. So that we're happy that we're moving forward in that to help our students and our universities be able to do that. Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
Yes, there is one question about what is the number of the environmental bill you mentioned?
It's it's in the 600s.
Okay.
It's
Okay,
like
we can-
630. I think it's
can
in the
find it.
six. Yeah, if you look under that thing, I'm sorry. I think it's
Yeah.
like maybe 636 or something like that.
Okay, they run together. And a quick
Mhm.
question, can we shut down the places that are buying the catalytic converters? Is that a
And
possibility?
that's part of the solution that they're attempting, I think, in the bill. If, you know, if they are, there's been kind of reporting and different kinds of things, but that's exactly one of the things that they're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me with you today.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. We appreciate your always have an eye to the environment. And we appreciate your work. Also with us this morning is Delegate David Bulova, representing the 87th District. And we appreciate your coming and your work for campaign finance reform. I know that's not over, but welcome. Please join us.
Marvelous. Oops, I think I'm a little taller. Yeah, I think if I stand back like this, I should be fine. First of all, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here today. It is really, really nice to go ahead and take a break, particularly a crossover to talk with folks who really do a great job advocating for sound policy in Virginia. And I just want to give a shout out for Vivian Watts, who she's the embodiment of the spirit of the League of Women Voters and is a very trusted person in the General Assembly. And she was actually my mentor when I first started back in 2006. So I represent City of Fairfax, parts of Central Fairfax County, and wanted to start off a little bit with campaign finance reform and then maybe touch on some of the other issues that I've had the pleasure of working on this particular year. But campaign finance reform is one of these issues, kind of like redistricting reform over the last couple of years, where it was just a sleepy issue that many people didn't go ahead and pay attention to. And all of a sudden, folks figured out that it actually really makes a big difference with respect to our politics and policy and how things are governed. And so I'm really starting to feel a groundswell with respect to campaign finance reform and the desire and the need to go ahead and do something here in Virginia. Betsy stole a little bit of my thunder with respect to the story about, sitting on the porch after our first election and realizing that we had spent about twice as much, quite honestly, as our first house had gone ahead and cost. But for me, it's really, there's two reasons why this is so important. Number one, it really does undercut the credibility of our electoral systems when somebody can go ahead and stroke just a huge check to go ahead and drive a campaign. And we have had in Virginia instances where you have out-of-state donors who have put in a $500,000 campaign check. And anybody who thinks that doesn't go ahead and sway the balance in terms of our elections is kidding themselves. I think the other thing, though, is that they just have become so expensive in general that I think a lot of people who would really like to be public servants and who would put their names out there, who would also make great public servants, are scared away by the fact that they have to go ahead and raise so much money. And I think the statistic from our last election was that there are over 15 House of Delegates races that cost over $1 million. And anybody going into the idea of running for electoral office is going to look at that and say, do I really want to go ahead and spend that much time on the phone every day trying to go ahead and raise money? So we really need to be able to get a better handle on this. Virginia is an outlier in a lot of different ways with respect to campaign finance in terms of really having very, very few controls that go ahead and help to moderate that. Last year, I think after watching a number of campaign finance reform bills kind of go down in flames, I was glad to be able to get through, with the League's support, a resolution to set up a joint subcommittee on campaign finance reform. And the idea was, that people seemed interested in the idea of campaign finance reform, but it never seemed that anything was quite ready, right? So it's death by 1,000 cuts. I really like the idea of campaign finance reform, but we're not going to pass this bill because X, Y, and Z. And so this was an opportunity to really kind of step back and do a deeper dive into campaign finance reform. We hadn't really done it for about 30 years, and there's a lot of great best practices out there in other states. And so it was a chance to step back and see what are other states doing, and then spend some time looking at how we might go ahead and reform Virginia's particular laws. It wound up being, I think we all knew it was a big topic, but it's a heck of a lot more complicated and bigger, than we had really kind of expected, given the short amount of time that we had. And so we did focus in first on transparency issues and making sure that some of our disclosure requirements were as robust as they could be. And so that was our first area of focus for this year. And so, just a couple of areas that we focused on were trying to finally pin down making sure that you couldn't use your campaign funds for personal gain or to go ahead and use it for personal use. We actually locked, I think, down what was a really good bill based on what we do at the federal level. And I think everybody was kind of kvetching over, well, how do you know if it's personal versus campaign use? Well, the federal level has already figured this out and has put that in place for a number of years. And so we were able to adopt something that was, specific to Virginia, but really kind of mirrored what was happening at the federal level, so that those no surprises, everybody kind of understood, and there was, a lot of backup material with examples. Unfortunately, it didn't pass the House, so it was introduced. I think it's still alive over in the Senate. And so I'm hopeful that will come over and maybe people will have a little bit more comfort level with respect to going ahead and passing that. Electioneering is another really big one. And so this is independent expenditures. The idea that independent expenditures can really go ahead and skirt a lot of our disclosure laws just by avoiding some magic words in terms of, hey, I want you to vote for or against David Bulova. That is reportable. However, if you say, hey, David Bulova is just an awful person and has done all these bad things, and it's timed like the week before the election, well, that clearly has an influence on the election, but it's not something that is currently covered. And so expanding the definition of electioneering, that didn't make it over on the House side, but I do think that that's a really weak spot in our campaign disclosure laws that we need to focus on. And then the one that we have had some success on the House side is with respect to just simply making sure that people can trust in the accuracy and completeness of our campaign finance disclosure laws. And so when I put in a report, when any of us go ahead and put in a report to say, hey, we've taken this much money and we've expended it on these kind of things, right now, nobody looks at it, right? So the only thing that the Department of Elections looks at is if you actually submitted your report. But there's no kind of review at all to go ahead and make sure that it's accurate. And so garbage in, garbage out in terms of how we go ahead and use that. Our neighbor to the south, North Carolina, has a very robust system, where they go ahead and look through and do a review of these on a periodic basis. And so that's what this would do, is just say, hey, we're going to have this random review process. And that way it keeps everybody kind of like, okay, we need to make sure that these are accurate. It's not meant as a gotcha. It doesn't have new penalties in there. And I think the most important thing is it lays out some expectations for treasurers to know what they need to go ahead and hold on to, what are their responsibilities, which I think regardless of the review process is probably a really good thing, so that treasurers kind of know what their expectations are. So again, the bigger one, and this is kind of this was so big to go ahead and take on in a year, is that we didn't have a chance to go ahead and get into the whole idea of contribution limits. And so again, Virginia is a serious outlier with respect to having no contribution limits whatsoever. Most states do. There's a wide variety of models that are out there. But that's something that we didn't have a chance to do a deep dive into, even though there were a number of bipartisan bills that were introduced to look at that. And so at least on the House side, we were able to pass a resolution to continue that joint study commission through the next year. And hopefully that'll get through the Senate and we can continue our work on that. So that's a little bit about the campaign finance reform. Seems to have taken up a lot of my time this year. But the nice thing about the General Assembly is we get to dabble in a ton of different issues. And so, just in terms of things that I've been working on, climate resiliency, this is an area where there's been a lot of bipartisan support. And so in Governor Northam's outgoing speech and Governor Youngkin's incoming speech, both of them mentioned climate resiliency. So we don't mention climate change. That tends to go ahead and raise some hackles, but everybody agrees that, given the fact that we've got sea level rise and coastal flooding and inland flooding, that it would be irresponsible not to prepare Virginia in order to be able to gird ourselves against those items. And so I put in 2 bills this year. Number one is to kind of formalize the planning process we put in place for coastal flooding. Virginia is among the most vulnerable states when it comes to our infrastructure. And so we need to make sure that there's some oversight and that our existing planning is a living document, but also to expand that to inland flooding. And so I think that's the key takeaway is that climate change is not going to just be a coastal issue. We have a lot more flashier storms and a lot more inland flooding as a result. And so that's one bill that will go ahead and expand that to statewide. And then we also got a new funding mechanism in order to help localities with those projects as well as individuals with those projects. And so on the House side and the Senate side, we've been able to pass a revolving loan fund for resiliency, which I think is really exciting because all this planning doesn't help unless you've actually got a mechanism in order to be able to go ahead and put that in place. So I imagine that at this particular point, I've probably taken up my 10 minutes and would love it if there's any kind of questions out there. If people are interested, I've also put in some bills to change our standards of learning testing. This is really exciting, right? So I believe in accountability in our public education systems. I believe in standards of learning assessments, but I always hate it when kids think that learning is actually filling in a bubble in a test, a high stakes test at the end of the year. And I know teachers don't like it as well because it makes them teach to the test. And so this year we've actually, my bill got rolled into a bill from Delegate Schuyler Van Valkenburg that will actually start to right size this and make this more about performance assessments and have more open-ended questions, right? And so instead of relying on, again, filling in a bubble, it's what did you learn? How do you apply it to real life today? And that is really the measure of, learning. And it's the ultimate account of accountability to be able to go ahead and do that. So anyways, I just wanted to say thank you for the league. You all do great advocacy work on behalf of our communities and really glad to be here with you today.
We do have a couple of questions. I know we're running over, but there's a question, is money as influential as we tend to think? And then there's a question about the audits. How random would the audits be and can citizens request an audit?
Yeah, and so with regard to the money, I think in a lot of cases, perception is reality, right? And so, I can speak for myself that if I get a contribution, that's not going to go ahead and influence whether I vote for something or not. It's usually I take it as I support candidate X, Y, and Z, and it's not about supporting a particular issue. But I can't speak for everybody, quite honestly. And I think, again, the perception that you get out there from folks is that if there's a big campaign contribution, I hate the feeling of that. And so you need to make sure that you guard against even the perception of impropriety, and huge checks like that feed into kind of that narrative, that we're doing pay to play. And that breaks my heart, in places like Virginia. As far as the audits, so it's not something that a citizen would be able to request. It's actually kind of automated the way it's laid out. And so kind of the way that the IRS does it, where you don't get audited every year, you don't get reviewed every year, but you always know that there's the risk of being audited or reviewed. And so the bill basically says, all right, for your statewide candidates where you're dealing with millions and millions of dollars, you're going to get audited every election cycle, right? To go ahead and check under the hood. For statewide candidates, random review. So you're basically drawing from a hat, and it would be 10% of your campaigns would get reviewed in a particular election cycle. For local elections, it would be 1%. And so again, the idea isn't not that everybody's going to get reviewed every year, but there's enough of a chance that you're going to go ahead and get reviewed, to make sure that you're paying attention and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I think that will go a long way, just to making sure that, everybody takes these reports very, very seriously, again, because I know there are people, through VPAP and other means, that do look at, who contributes to who, and you want to make sure that you can rely on that information.
Thanks, Deb. That's all we've got in chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Delegate Bulova. Appreciate all your work on campaign finance reform, and thank you for joining us this morning. Next, we have Delegate Vivian Watts. Vivian Watts is the delegate for District 39. Welcome, Delegate Watts.
Thank you, as always. I appreciate being here. I I'm going to try to split my 10 minutes so that I address a few things about the campaign finance reform, just from my years of experience. I had a state officer of the CPAs as my treasurer one year. He was a constituent. And there were major problems at the end. And I ended up being my own treasurer from there on out because I had a $5,000 discrepancy because of the way in which he treated certain contributions and didn't treat the cumulative effect of contributions the way in which they were supposed to be corrected. I mentioned that because the greatest thing that will come out of audit is setting standards so that you know what you're supposed to do as well-informed people in another field that may well be financial, apply appropriately to the campaign issue. I will mention also that because I'm a numbers person and very, well, anyway, I keep good records. And we get $1,250 every month for expenses as a legislator. And before the tax reform under the previous administration, that could be a business expense. And I always paid close attention. Again, Virginia Society of CPAs put out early on what is a legitimate legislative business expense as you are communicating with your constituents. So I kept very good records. And I always was able to deduct far more in business expenses, legitimate business expenses, than I was given as a monthly expense account. And the result of it, and I'll tell you in a moment why I know this, was about $4,000 in a less paying of income tax, because otherwise that money that I was given was income. Well, when we had quite an embarrassing situation with a previous governor who was in court over improper influence and how the money was received, etc. Even though we're only talking about $4,000, and as my daughter-in-law who does this sort of thing said, they're not going after the money. The IRS is going after you because you're a Virginia elected official and they're looking for more corruption. So with all of my records this thick for each one of the things that I declared, including the Costco circles of when I buy my copy paper from Costco, you used to get all of these things sent to you as far as reports. Now you have to print them out. So you've got a lot of toner, you've got to buy your printer possibly and depreciate that, etc. Well, I had my records and I was squeaky clean. And as somebody said, they sure picked the wrong person. But I say that because that is the level of detail that we are looking for when you ask for that kind of audit capability. So I bring that out because one has to keep that in mind, as important as it is. And I'll stand by it forever about what I was doing, and most members will not take the time to do that. They'll just pay the additional taxes. But that when you talk about citizens being able to randomly ask for an audit, that can become a real problem during the heat of the campaign. And so that the idea that you would have this rotating, because certainly as I was doing it over the years, I never expected to be audited, but I always have in the back of my mind that what if I were? So that's why I've been squeaky clean, but it's quite a challenge to do so. Having the standards will be a godsend, because as we, particularly in the House of Delegates, we run every 2 years. You have, depending upon the size of your race, you have people coming in doing whatever. And guess what? By November 15th, they've left your basement. And now you're on your own again, and you're the one who assigned all of these reports. So the standards to be able to hold people to in performance will be just absolutely invaluable. One other thing, and I may not have time to get into what I was going to talk about, is that the other thing that really, really bothers me about the amount of money that is in Virginia campaigns is how it really takes away from what I believe should be the quality of the campaign. Because we are an off year state, particularly for House of Delegates, you have a number of people who really are national consultants, and they're just preparing for the next congressional race. And so they play out some things on a Virginia state race. Try this out, try that out. They're not, particularly, again, House of Delegates, 100 different districts. They're really not in touch with the issues that are in my corner of the state. They don't, and so you're trying out these various, what I'm going to call bumper sticker themes. You flood the mails, you use all kinds of social media now, various ways in which you're paying for this. And it just multiplies, but it multiplies in my perspective on a bumper sticker basis, a tweet level communication rather than real communication about issues that are important in the state legislature in that area of the Commonwealth. And I would devoutly love to go back to the day, and I still hold to it. Half of the material that I send out in any given campaign, I've produced myself, because I've kept good records about environmentalists and people who are interested in education and transportation and so on. So I know that I can send out something that has the second level of importance about issues, not just headline accusations back and forth. So again, I think it has hurt the quality of our campaigns as all of this money has come in. So I'll be very, very quick. I probably only have about 2 minutes max, but I still remain absolutely up to here and above because we're in a situation of having so much revenue surplus. As you know, like any state, we've got to balance the budget. We have always had high ratings for being fiscally well managed. We're a AAA bond state, so we don't exaggerate. Therefore, as you did not know when you were putting together the budget 6 months ago, most of this was done, what the COVID economy would be. And certainly when you're putting together the proposed budget for the next 2 years, being overly optimistic is not acceptable in state budgeting. So as the economy comes back in certain areas and not so much in others, we are seeing more and more surplus added. But that surplus, for the most part, particularly, let me just talk specifically about transportation funding, is only a surplus because we're back to where we expected to be 3 years ago, had to go down in our expectations. And so the budget is put together at that more conservative scale. And now we're seeing, in fact, people are getting back into the office. You are using transportation in a way that you weren't. So our revenues are up. And that's multiplied in all of our other areas. And so what I am deeply concerned about is that this is being approached as if this is representative of our basic ability to pay for our long-term needs, which particularly for me we're bottom in the nation in teacher salaries compared to the other salaries in the state. We have a huge problem in mental health services and the professionals that we need to employ, and we absolutely are not competitive in salaries. As I know I've said before, you open up a Walmart or an Amazon distribution center, and you've lost your on the floor staffing in our mental facilities. Besides needing to encourage through our salary structure people to get into these essential fields. And then also law enforcement. 20 years ago, it was routine for the state police to have recruits that had post-high school, usually 2 years of post-high school education. And now recruits have GEDs. Besides not having the life experience that you would want to have in a field such as law enforcement, as you fill the need for people on the ground. So all of these are huge issues that have been pushed back, especially when it comes to education. We're still basically where we were in 2008 after that recession. We've got so many needs to meet. And the idea that we're just going to willy-nilly change our tax structure because of bookkeeping surpluses is of deep concern to me as far as the ongoing public responsibilities that we have. So I keep on doing the midnight oil, even though it's after crossover, because the budget comes out next week. And I'm very concerned about some of the language and the way it's going forward on some of these things, and seeing what I can do to try to keep it as accurate, honest. Ramifications, unintended consequences are fully before the decision makers on this.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Joan, are there any questions in the chat?
No, there is not, Deb.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate Watts. We appreciate the time that you give us and the expertise that you bring to your role. And thank you for pointing out all of the surpluses that we have are not necessarily surplus. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is Patrick Llewellyn from Campaign Legal Center. Patrick is the Director of State Campaign Finance. And Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. He's been a great resource to us as we have grappled with this issue. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Deb. It's nice to meet all of you and to see some of you again. As Deb mentioned, my name is Patrick Llewellyn. I'm the Director of State Campaign Finance at the Campaign Legal Center, which means I direct and manage our state and local campaign finance policy work. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, CLC is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. That works to advance democracy through law. And we work at all levels of government and generally see our work as spanning 4 large issue areas: campaign finance, government ethics, voting rights, and redistricting. And the goal of all the work that we do is to establish a political process that is accessible to everyone and that results in a representative, responsive, and accountable government. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. Both in Virginia and elsewhere across the country, the League is an important partner of ours. And so I thought I would talk briefly about a handful of big picture campaign finance reform issues that I know are important in Virginia, but that we also see as significant issues across the country, and hopefully provide a starting point for maybe a conversation or some questions about those issues. And so I've got about 10 minutes worth of material and happy to stick around and take questions and discuss further after that. But first, perhaps expectedly, is contribution limits. And I know that this is a big issue in Virginia and that lots of folks have been working on this for several years to try to implement them. As some of you may know, contribution limits have been part of the foundation of modern campaign finance laws ever since the Supreme Court made a constitutional distinction between contributions, that is money given to another to influence elections, and expenditures, that is money spent to influence elections, in the case Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, with the court basically saying that generally contributions can be limited and generally, with some caveats, expenditures cannot be. Now, other states and localities, and I think this is important to remember, also deal with either trying to implement contribution limits for the first time or updating their contribution limits. And those efforts in lots of places often take significant time in hearing from stakeholders and making determinations based on local circumstances. So although this is true for many issues, it's especially true for contribution limits that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But there are some high-level issues beyond setting the dollar figures for limits themselves that often arise. And one of them is ensuring that the law properly accounts for what we sometimes call coordinated expenditures, which means making sure that expenditures that are coordinated with the candidate are treated like contributions to a candidate. So when a person or group spends money to influence an election, but they do so in coordination with or taking direction from a candidate, that's functionally no different from giving money directly to the candidate and should be treated the same. And this is especially important given that independent expenditures, which I know Delegate Bulova spoke about earlier, and that is expenditures that are made without coordinating with a candidate, generally cannot be limited, including those by corporations after the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. So without strong coordination rules, wealthy special interests can often evade contribution limits by simply coordinating their spending with candidates, which is why it's also an important component of establishing strong contribution limits. And the second big picture issue, which I know Delegate Bulova also spoke about, is disclosure, by which I mean the transparency requirements that apply or should apply to election-related spending. Given the explosion of independent spending in elections over the past decade, with some data indicating that there's been a tenfold increase from 2010 to 2020, ensuring that voters know who's spending big money to influence their vote is a critical part of the democratic process. Now, like Virginia, many states' disclosure laws fall short in a variety of ways. And as CLC noted in testimony to the Virginia subcommittee studying campaign finance reform last fall, there's a few significant areas that I think are worth highlighting and potentially prioritizing. The first is ensuring that all election-related spending is subject to transparency requirements. Virginia, like some other places, limits some of its transparency requirements to what is sometimes called express advocacy. And I know Delegate Bulova mentioned this as well. And that's when a communication expressly advocates for the election or defeat of a candidate. But we all know that ads that don't explicitly say vote for or vote against are used to influence elections. And wealthy special interests can use this loophole to avoid disclosure requirements. So strong disclosure laws should ensure that all ads that promote or attack a candidate, as well as those that mention a candidate close to an election, comply with transparency requirements. And then second, the original source of big money spent to influence elections should be disclosed to the public. Most states focus disclosure requirements on direct contributors. That is the person or group literally writing the check to the spender, but don't go any further. And in Virginia, at least for many independent spenders, there's no requirement to even disclose direct contributors. But when the law focuses only on direct contributors, wealthy special interests can evade disclosure by simply passing their money through several entities, which would result in the disclosure of at most an intermediary, like a front group or a shell group created to hide the original source. And importantly, the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed the constitutionality and importance of campaign finance transparency requirements. In fact, even in Citizens United, the court upheld federal disclosure laws by an 8-to-1 vote. So while large amounts of money may continue to be spent on elections, the sources of that money can and should be brought to light. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure to discuss public financing. While it's not a panacea, strong public financing programs can offer a powerful antidote to an election process dominated by big money and special interests. And in particular, public financing can provide a path to elected office that enables candidates to focus on their constituents and it can amplify the voices of everyday people in providing financial support to candidates of their choice. Moreover, these programs can encourage new and diverse candidates to run for office, resulting in elected officials and a donor base that are more representative of their communities. There's two types of programs in particular that stand out that I thought would be worth highlighting. First, small donor matching funds programs like those in New York City or here in Washington, D.C., focus on providing public funds at a multiplied rate based on small dollar contributions received from qualified residents. So for example, DC provides $5 to every $1 of small contributions received by the participating candidates, meaning that, for example, a $50 contribution would be matched with $250 in public funds, resulting in a total contribution to the candidate of $300. Second, voucher or democracy dollars programs like the one pioneered in Seattle provide an opportunity for all qualified residents to contribute to candidates, even when they may lack expendable income to do so. Under Seattle's program, each qualified resident receives 4 vouchers that are worth $25 each, which they may then give to one or more participating candidates. So a resident could give 1 voucher to 4 different candidates, resulting in $25 going to each, or it could give all 4 to one candidate, resulting in $100 for that candidate. And I thought it was worth mentioning because many of these successful programs are implemented at the local level, which can provide opportunities to implement smaller versions of the programs at the city or county level. And I understand that, Virginia localities would require authorization from the state to do so, but that's the approach that's been taken in the neighboring state of Maryland, and it may offer a path forward for some communities in Virginia as well. And to close, I thought I'd just mention that, we'd like to see, hopefully long-term, the conversation both outside and inside the courts reframed about campaign finance. Courts have often talked about campaign finance regulation as restricting speech. In other words, the perspective is always that these laws impede First Amendment rights and that there must be a significantly strong reason to do so. But that relies on the flawed premise that the First Amendment narrowly promotes only the spending of money for elections and little else in this context. But instead, a more robust understanding of the First Amendment must include that the history and the purpose of the freedoms it protects is to ensure democratic self-governance. And properly understood, campaign finance laws promote democratic self-governance, including by ensuring that elected representatives are responsive to their constituents and not simply to the wealthiest donors. Thanks.
Thank you. Deb, I don't see any questions in chat.
Great. Patrick, thank you so much. We look forward to a continued partnership with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have with us Nancy Morgan, who is the director of America's Promise Virginia, and give us just a moment here to do a quick screen share.
Hi, everybody. I won't take a lot of time since we're running over, and thanks for the League of Women Voters for organizing this important event on an important issue. I'm just going to go back to perhaps to Marcus Simon's comments in the beginning, and let's take a look at what's happening in terms of the bills. And how do I move down? It's like pressing down, but. Oops, sorry. Oh, there we go. Where did you press? Sorry. Okay, so just a quick comment about American Promise. It's basically a. Pardon? So let me just go to here. Screen share there. Here. Okay. Sorry about this.
No, it's okay. Okay, and then keep your focus on your deck.
Okay, well,
You should pull it up.
That slide, slide. Top corner, sorry. Okay, slideshow. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about this. Okay, American Promise, we're sort of unique in the democracy reform space in that we only look at campaign finance. Federally, we're looking at passing a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and Buckley versus Vallejo and all the issues that Patrick Llewellyn mentioned, because basically you can't regulate expenditures, as he said. And also in Virginia, we would be remiss if we didn't look at campaign finance. And so we talked about this in the beginning, Marcus Simon, but when you see it on the screen, it's just remarkable, you know, how the money spent on the last election. It was $80 million for the House of Delegates, up 25%. And the shocking thing was the governor's race, which went up to over 141 million, which is basically double what it was in 2017. And that brought up the issue of the whole idea of spending, restricting spending when you're running against a self-financed candidate. And basically what it did was, when you look at Virginia, we're rated 46 out of 50 on the Swamp Index through the Coalition for Integrity. It's basically, these are ranked based on transparency and accountability measures, including ethics issues. And you can see that Virginia, we're only followed by Utah, Michigan, Arizona, Idaho, and Wyoming. And when you look at the graveyard of campaign finance bills, it goes back to, you know, the Governor Wilder's report in 1994, where he recommended campaign finance limits. So we've been waiting 30 years, and basically every year the bills died, although David Bulova's bill was the only bill out of 11 bills that actually passed last year. So you can see here, we were active in advocating, and you can see that Janet Boyd from the League of Women Voters, we virtually we participated in each of these meetings, and we were pleased with the outcome. And why were we so optimistic? I think it was because coming into this year, the most expensive election in Virginia history, $7 million spent in obscure attack ads, the lessons and input from the Joint Committee, and also the coverage by the press. And we commissioned a study with the Wasson Center, and actually the statistics were compelling. Almost 80% of Virginians care about campaign finance. They want to reduce the influence of big donors. 75% want limitations. A resounding 88% of citizens want disclosure. And an interesting issue, 73% of people want bans on restrictions on personal use of campaign finance. We are one of 2 states that allow this. So we were very optimistic. 24 bills were introduced. Is this amazing? So, but when you look at our batting average right now, and yesterday was crossover, there are 7 bills still in play. The David Bulova, great, his oversight bill, 4 disclosures, two out of the Senate, 2 out of the House. Limitations were just, that was like a slaughter. 12 bills introduced, and actually John Bell's bill passed yesterday, which was great, 37-3, 3 Republicans voting against it. And then there's a study committee that extending the study committee. So that's good news. And basically that's good news because that's the foundation for comprehensive campaign finance reform. You actually can't have limitations when you have the Board of Elections that can't provide oversight. And I'm not going to go through this, but you'll have access to this. This sort of goes through all the bills that went through the House, what went through the Senate, and now they're moving over. So the big question for all of us is, how can we as advocates take action? And both the League, I noticed they're sending out calls to actions on a lot of bills, which is great. Send your your legislators a message that you want these bills passed. We're willing to work with you to write letters to an editor, to a local paper, and help organize meetings with your legislators. We're down here going around door to door, knocking on legislators' doors. That makes a difference. And even next year, you certainly could introduce a resolution in your local community saying, this is not a bipartisan issue. We want reform, and legislators hopefully will listen to that. So I think that there's a lot of citizens advocacy opportunities. This is a long-term issue. We have a five-year plan. We're delighted to work with the league. I'm a league member. And I think this is really something, if we could have a bipartisan win on this issue within the next 2 years, it's a win for legislators and it's a win for voters. So thank Deb, thanks Joan, thanks Janet Boyd, thanks you to my colleague who was out there on the testifying on the John bill on the House of, in the Senate. I think this is really an opportunity for collaboration and thanks for inviting us. Thanks.
Nancy, we do have a question. Nancy?
Yeah.
Okay. What happens to the ability of an issue organization to publish a list of how legislators voted on bills of importance? Does that affect it at all?
I think that's very effective. If just going back to the John Bell bill, when it went through it went through the Privileged Elections Committee, it went to the Finance Committee, it was 13-2. One of the legislators, I mean, fine, call him out, John Edwards, a Democrat from Rowan or Blacksburg. And so what we did was then we went down to, we have some students at Virginia Tech. We said, and even the league has, your colleague who was on the subcommittee, she's in that area too. Send your legislator an email. Send him, ask him why he voted against a bill that was elaborated in a taxpayer-funded bipartisan committee. So it was very interesting. You know, we were interested in seeing the vote. He voted yes yesterday. So I think that's a lesson to everybody. Write a letter to the editor. They don't like their names then in local newspapers and call them. But like the suffragettes, the league, you know, when you pass the 19th Amendment, the only way you can do it is by raising your voice. So I'm waving my hands.
Thanks, Deb. We don't have any more questions.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. I know you've been working on this issue for a long time. We're not there yet, but appreciate your commitment and partnership. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I know we ran over today, but this is such an important issue, and so appreciate your time and all of the people that could weigh in on it. So join us next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Have a great day.